closing circle with our parliamentary secretary. But first, our final panelist, Jude Benoit. Jude, a two-spirit person, advocate for the two-spirit trans community, and co-founder of grassroots groups like the Indigenous Activist Collective and the neighboring pod. Over to you, Jude, as the final speaker, and then to our parliamentary secretary to conclude the afternoon with our sharing circle. A few minutes to you, Jude.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be here. I had a lot of different things that I wanted to say, and this is a very short amount of time, but I would like to start with, I guess I wasn't going to talk about my grandmother, but then someone else brought up their grandmother, so I'm just going to go for it. My grandmother also went through a similar struggle where she married at a young age to escape servitude to the Catholic Church. The difference, I'm not sure if your grandmother was Indigenous, the person that spoke before me, but my grandmother was Mi'kmaq First Nations to this island. And when she married my grandfather, who was a white man, she lost all rights to herself. The very few rights that she had as an Indigenous girl disappeared, and she was his property, essentially. She wasn't allowed to own property. She wasn't allowed to go to school. She wasn't allowed to vote. All of these things that we talk about when we talk, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of the voices that spoke on this panel today were white. And when we're talking about feminism, we absolutely need to bring up women's voices and equality that a lot of us have. When we're talking about feminist struggle, a lot of us are on a very different timeline. Indigenous women, Indigenous girls, Indigenous two-spirit people are suffering. And there are quite a few things just on a base level that we can do in Newfoundland and Labrador to try to help that suffering and to try to heal, but we can't heal while there's continued violence. With that being said, during COVID, my body fell apart. If I could just like talk to people as people, I, like most of us, was taking care of elderly family members. I was working customer service and minimum wage. And minimum wage is not a living wage, and all of this different stress that happened to me because I live well below the poverty line contributed to my overall physical and mental health just completely tanking. When I was asked to do this panel, I had to consider if I even had the spoons, the energy to sit and talk for 5 minutes. And I'm so glad that I came, but I am exhausted. And I think that it's important to point that out, that, you know, I created grassroots movements because the government failed us. They failed us from before this pandemic even moved in by having a lack of resources, such as accessible and safe food banks. There should be no limit on how much a family needs to eat. I don't know if you've ever, I personally have had to go to a food bank. They don't give you enough food to last 2 weeks, never mind if you're an isolated elderly person and you can't afford to transportation. It just was a mess. One of the things that we created with the neighboring pod was food hampers and food gift cards. And we had racialized, disabled, Indigenous women and trans people who were also working full-time in minimum wage jobs, driving around the city at night to drop off food hampers. And often I find that that labor of taking care of communities falls on the people that do not have the energy to take care of those people. It's a constant cycle of harm of, okay, I'm helping someone else, but now my body is breaking down and now I need help. And that is exhausting. And it, you know, it's, I think that's really, if I had to connect globally what women and trans, not non-cis men face together, is that we are always taking care of ourselves and we're also always striving to take care of everyone else. But there's a reason why grassroots movements and non-for-profits and why there's such a high burnout rate to that, because we are often doing things that we do not have the energy and the resources to do. And as beautiful and inspiring as these stories are of communities coming together and taking care of each other, the stories might be beautiful, but behind that, there's a very real systemic issue. There's several very real systemic issues behind why we need to take care of ourselves. We shouldn't be solely reliant on grassroots movements and nonprofits and charities to take care of people. That should be what our government is for. Yeah, I don't know how long I've gone on time. Sorry.
Well, Jude, we could only express to you our profound thanks. You are the connective tissue at the most grassroots level, doing the most fundamental lifting up of lives. So thank you for coming with us today. And I hope we all can see each other's connectivity, and certainly our two collaborators in the sharing circle will give us ideas next on how we can stay connected and help you more than we are doing now.
Yeah, so as my photo was put up earlier, that is the statue of Court Riel. He was a slaver that stole my people and Beothuk people and killed them, sold them into slavery. There's no reason for his statue to still be up outside of the Confederation building. There's no reason for a lot of these statues and names. The doctrine of discovery, I was just talking to some of the people that are with me in the Indigenous Activist Collective, and we believe that there needs to be a huge renaming and ripping down of these colonial figures. That is like bare minimum, and I'm asking for it today because I actually believe that by me asking today that we can make it happen. I know that there's history connected to it, but it's not a history that should be celebrated. It's a history that we should be ashamed of. So we would like the start of that ball to be rolling. We've been asking for years. And then on top of that, also defunding and dismantling the police and raising the minimum wage and or implementing a universal basic income, because those of us that are most marginalized are quite literally dying in poverty. I think that's it. Oh, when we're removing the statue, can we give that power back to the people instead of using it to, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it needs to be given the power back to the people. They worked towards getting it taken down, so they should be in charge of how it's taken down, and not just elected members that are Indigenous or members of your choosing, but members of our choosing who are important and spiritual and sacred to us.